Hello, 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 hello. Today I'm talking with Kevlin Henney. We talked about all kinds of writing, having a book as a big business card, and why his name is in the dictionary.
I'm Yves from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it.
Hello, hello everyone, and hello with me I have Kevlin. Welcome.
Thank you for having me here.
And here I want to show immediately a little bit. Here is, oops, and I have a screen that turned on my side. Here is, for me, is in Belgium, in Ghent, and for you, and then we ask Google to show a little bit, it's in Bristol in the UK.
That's right.
And on my side, it's a little bit over 5 o'clock, or actually, we had a pre-talk a little bit, so it's already 20 minutes before 6 on my side. And on your side, what's the time on your side?
It's coming up at 20 to 5. So, yeah.
So yeah, we have a small time difference of 1 hour.
A very modest
And
time difference, and I'm still drinking coffee. I normally have a cut off at around 5 o'clock. So, yeah.
I switched already to tea because it's like I said in the pre-talk, I didn't sleep really well the last two nights, and it's probably because of too much coffee at the office the last days. So and on Thursday, on Sunday as well. Kevlin, before we jump into the questions, what do you want people to know about you? Who, for the few people that don't know you, who are you?
Right. My name's Kevlin Henney. I work for myself. As he's just pointed out, I'm based in Bristol in the UK. My work generally happens online. I work from home, running workshops, doing talks, and occasionally bits of review stuff. But I also travel, workshops for companies or at conferences. I probably travel a bit less than I used to. I tend to do a lot more from home, and that involves, training, writing, workshops, talks, occasional bits of consultancy. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And in terms of something about me that defines who I am, that's not actually to do with computers. I play guitar very badly. I do yoga very poorly, and I write short fiction very occasionally.
That's the extras. And I think, well, I do want to bring it up. You're one of the few people that have even has something in the Urban Dictionary about you.
Yeah,
I can show it here if you want to say a
yeah,
little bit about that. What's this about?
yeah. So my name is associated with failure, which is, it's a great way of looking at it. And this ultimately comes about because I used to take photographs. And for those of you who are perhaps not that old, there was a time when phones didn't have cameras. And as they started having cameras, obviously people take more photographs. And I started taking photographs of screen failures. And then when I would be at companies or doing talks, I sometimes use these images because often these software failures tell you something. I mean, sometimes they're just amusing, but also they tell you something about how a system is built. In other words, I like to say that in software, or in failure, software reveals itself. It's the moment you lose all encapsulation. All of the art of abstraction just disappears and collapses at that point. And what you're left with is something about how it was built. And that's something, sometimes it tells you about the operating system. The Windows boot screens, but also increasingly popular Linux screens. And it sometimes tells you about the tech stack that's using. Literally, you can get a stack trace and you can kind of look at it and go, oh, okay, you're using this version of this and so on. It tells you about the programming languages, but more broadly, it can sometimes tell you about the company and the processes around the software. What did they test? What did they not test? What did they review? What did they not review? How long have they had this mistake? This bug or these defects. That's also interesting information. So I kind of use it one as a kind of a bit of an icebreaker, but also as a relevant point. We build the modern world, and there's an interesting responsibility, but every now and then something breaks through, and it's our responsibility to try and pay attention to this, because our little moments where we're saying, oh, it's just a bug, is somebody else's user experience. So that, so then we hit the era of social media, and suddenly people start atting me with this stuff rather than just emailing it, and then I start retweeting it and resharing it across all the platforms. I now do, it used to be Twitter, but now it's on a variety of different platforms. And a number of years ago, somebody said, "Oh, I was going through the airport and I saw a Kevlin Henney screen," and it's kind of stuck from that point on. It was a Kevlin Henney screen, and then just a Kevlin Henney. And I think the Urban Dictionary entry, if I remember correctly, it was Hadi Hariri from JetBrains who made that entry back in 2018. But the term Kevlin Henney has appeared in the Register and in other places. So yeah, it's a thing. It's a good conversation starter. And my wife, when she started a new job last year, it was one of those facts that she shared with people, facts that you might not know. And she said, "Oh, my husband's have a dictionary." So yeah, no, that was one of those things.
Yeah, and I really like how because you keep using it also indeed in as introductory, as an icebreakers in at the beginning of your talks and things like that, and sometimes indeed as explanation. So this is where you see this and that. I really like how it's not just the fun part, but it's also the learning part about that. So we see
Yeah,
that we can learn something about it, and that's what triggers me always to see these things and send it to you or send it, yeah,
yeah.
and collect them when I see them online. I really like that. So yeah, it's it's like more than fun. Exactly.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. It's. I mean, the best fun is educational, and the best education is fun. That's the point. And it's
Oh
always a
yeah.
case of, you kind of look at something, and it's kind of interesting. And then there's the question, oh, why? How did this come about? What led to this? And sometimes there's an innocent reason, but other times there's something a little bit deeper, and it invites you to ask more questions about it.
And to look at our own software and see, could that really happen
Yeah,
in our case? Are we using the same stack trace, or maybe we might have that same problem? It might be less
yeah,
visible as in an
yeah,
airport or in other places, but I think
yeah.
everybody who's, well, you don't even have to be in IT to have seen already these kind of error screens. You can see it
Exactly.
everywhere.
I think that's the important point, is that, going back to something I sort of mentioned, is that we are in the world of software development, we are creating other people's user experiences. We are affecting their
Exactly.
day. Hopefully, we're doing it positively, but actually,
From time to
sometimes
time,
we, from time to time, yeah, from time to time. Yeah, although sometimes people would invert that and say, from time to time, we're doing it positively. But there is a case. There are the obvious things about people often think of. Um, Points when we talk about things like user experience as an intentional design there, but then there's the area more of neglect of failures. So when we sort of say, oh, that's actually somebody else's user experience, that we stop them doing something. There's something that they were going to do but they cannot do at this particular point. But there's also another thing that I find interesting, which is to do. I mean, these days security has become increasingly relevant. And the point is that anything that is a bug or a failure is effectively an attack surface. From a user experience, there's almost no difference between we're being hacked and this doesn't work. And they often arrive via the same oversights and issues that we experience in software. And that's sometimes organizational, it's sometimes technical. And so there's a kind of an area where, yeah, we should be concerned. And the point you made, I think, is really important, is that it's quite fun to laugh at and say, "Oh, that's somebody else's problem," and then realize maybe we experience the same thing. Could our software also have this issue? And I think that's it's important to hold a mirror up.
Anyway, every time for me, I always have the phrase that every time we mix something with a computer, we get a computer. We mix a car with a computer, we get a computer. We have to reboot cars, we have to reboot refrigerators and phones and whatever. And
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
It's,
it's when people start finding that, we discover that, our daily experiences now require two-factor authentication, or there's various things that certain activities we might do are now mediated through this. Had a good example of, years ago, I used to use a Microsoft Surface Band. So it was a kind of like funky, chunky watch. Didn't just count your steps, did a whole load of other stuff. And I used to use it when I used to do sort of middle distance running, about 10 years ago. And I kind of stopped, and I realized also I was, I didn't need to know my steps. I was over quantifying myself. And I set that to one side for a number of years. My wife, a couple of years ago, asked me, "Oh, do you still have that watch?" And I said, yeah, sure. Let me just recharge it. And I gave it to her. She couldn't use it because the whole software had been bricked, and Microsoft discontinued it. So the whole thing, she wanted to use this. She does Nordic walking. She wanted to use this for that. And it's just like, no, you can't. I still own the hardware, but it's basically software breathes life into it. And the software actually was technically bricked, and that was it. You could not update it. You could not use it for any of its original functionality. Um, um, and that was it, game over. Yeah, exactly as you say. And it goes even further, if you like. It's not just, mix anything with a computer, you get a computer. You mix anything with software, because I still had, the hardware was fine. There was nothing wrong with the hardware. It was very well built. It was the software. It was the spirit of life, if you like, the thing that actually makes it what it is. And it's just like, nope, dead.
yeah, and yeah, I feel that and many different things, and I think it's yeah, I think many people in IT were probably even more wary. Like, do we want to bring a computer into this? Do I want a fridge with a computer? Do I want, because then it's, yes,
Yeah.
it's interesting that all my devices are now automatically have the new time, and so when we switch times in time zone switches, it's good that I don't have to walk around the house anymore to switch all the timers. But yeah, that also brings in other problems,
Mm,
like you say,
yeah.
if
Yeah.
if they stop supporting it, that's yeah, I hope that my fridge, I don't have a fridge that's connected to the internet, but all these appliances that typically
Yeah.
go for 10 years or longer, if they're now connected to the internet, then the service has to keep running, and or they should keep working without the service, and
I
anything
think that
like
that
that.
that point is an interesting one, because I think there's plenty of people in software that I know are actually quite cautious about automating everything in their home. And I think the clock example is quite a good one, because the clocks keep on being clocks. Pretty much all clocks will keep on being clocks even when they can't get a signal. And that's what I want. It's just like, yeah, can't update, but I'm still whatever I was, at the last moment that you left, and that's absolutely fine. And it's also light touch things. In other words, these things don't necessarily. I have an easy option out. So, you know, I'm currently looking at an analog clock on my wall as well as the various digital devices in my room. And the point is, there's an easy option out. And I think for a lot of the technology that we engage in, there isn't. That there isn't an easy fallback, and that we end up with that classic problem of vendor lock-in, though we might use different terminology now.
I recognize that. Okay, we already went very deep. Well, just
Yeah,
for the
just on the
pre-questions, but
intros.
I,
Yeah.
yeah, but I really love that. Well, let's start with that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
Oh, that's a good one. This is a difficult question to ask, because or answer, because I'm actually I share a lot of myself in my talks and so on, and so therefore, in theory, a lot of me is knowable. But there are a couple of things that I think probably, I think actually, let me pick on one. Um, right back at the beginning of my career, in software development, relatively near the beginning of my career in software development, I worked for a company, and I had a terrible time. I was there for a year. It was during a recession, so therefore the option of getting out was a lot harder. And I realized I didn't want to work there. In fact, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake within the first week. I also realized I had no options. And I felt, the whole experience of being in that place was unpleasant. I did not enjoy working there. And it was one of those things that I felt very, I don't know, disempowered. I didn't feel that I was making good. I wasn't using technical skills. I wasn't getting good technical skills. Or I didn't feel that the bit that I was there for was, maybe I was a fraud. Maybe I didn't know how to develop software because that's how it felt during the day. That it was all of this. So interesting. What I did is during that
Realize
period,
that in the first week. You realized that
yeah,
in the first week. Okay.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. Or rather, in the first week, I realized I'd made a mistake. As the months wore on, I realized I just didn't feel valued. In other words, it's just like it's that feeling of like, well, hey, this is something I care about and I want to care about it. And it was. It was a very depressing experience. But one of the things I ended up doing as a result of that, a couple of things. One is I started teaching. I did tuition in the evening. So I was teaching, school kids or university folks or people who graduated from university stuff about computers, primarily about programming. And in other words, I was doing that to try and feel that I was doing something worthwhile. And I also started writing articles. I'd written a couple of articles before, but actually that's when I started writing lots of articles. Because it was one of those things. I kind of get home and, as it were, become a software developer. I felt that what I was doing in the day was so disheartening, and that's actually what started me down this kind of whole road. That's effectively, it was from that. And that's helped a number of times. I mean, I still write, I still obviously present and do all kinds of stuff, but that was kind of the beginning of that. And I actually recognized it in a company I visited over 10 years ago when I realized that they had a terrible work situation, because I remember the architects telling me, oh, these people, they just come into work, they, as it were, punch the clock, they come into work, they do this, the code base never gets any better, and then they go home and they don't really care about software. And then and while I was there for consultancy, I did a kind of round the room. I said, oh, can I speak to the developers? We did a round the room, kind of like training course style introductions. And what I learned is that this was the most enthusiastic software focused group that I have ever encountered. Every single person had a hobby that involved software. Some of them were contributing,
But not at work.
but not at work. They were going home to feel validated. They were
Wow.
they were helping kids at their local school learn how to program. They were contributing to open source projects. They were creating private projects to learn how to program on mobile, or learn a new paradigm, new programming language. It was just every single person, and it was just like, oh, I've seen this before. I know what this is. This is me. I've seen and experienced this. That tells me something about their work. They do not feel validated and empowered, and they just go home, well, to be software developers that they wanted. So that ultimately, I never really thought about it until you asked the question, but that ultimately kind of set a lot. Well, it kind of cast a very positive and long shadow over the way that I work and the person that I've become and the path that I've taken.
Wow, that's it's really a great observation, because indeed it's very tempting sometimes, or I think many people or consultants we have heard already, managers or other people complaining about developers, like, oh, they don't feel it. And I've seen it in many companies for many different kind of roles. And indeed, so many people look for validation outside of work,
Yeah.
which is really sad, because we spend like 8 hours at work, day in, day
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
We There is almost no place where we spend so much time with other people as in
Yeah.
work. And if that doesn't work, if that drains energy, it's really sad.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I hadn't really. It was one of those things. I looked at that. You sent out the questions, and I actually asked my wife, and I said, "What would I answer?" And she said that's difficult because you already share a lot of yourself online. I was like, "I know." And she came up with a couple of examples, and then suddenly it was just like on the pattern of what she said. And I said, "Actually, there's one that happens before all of that, and I'd never thought about it like this."
so that's really good. And it was a bad experience that actually turned out for you good, because you can, especially I would say
Yeah.
as a consultant, you can now, how would I say, connect to the people that have these same
Yeah.
kind of problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I've
And
been
yeah,
you. I see that. I understand who you are. Yeah, it's shit. Yeah.
been there, done that. Well,
Yeah.
maybe you didn't have the T-shirt, but at least you had
Not at the time.
something. Really wonderful answer. Thank you for that. Let's move into that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, you have any idea what would have become of you?
Well, I used to kind of joke. Well, this is one of those questions that I don't know. In my 20s, as a group of friends, we'd sometimes ask, "Okay, what else would you be doing if you weren't doing?" Yeah, and I always used to joke, I'd be an unsuccessful writer. I'd fail to write novels, or I'd write novels that were unsuccessful. It's and that was kind of a joke. As I certainly in my teens, I was quite interested in this idea. Oh, maybe I could become a writer. And then I went to university and I did a little bit of that. But then I actually ended up um, having a relationship with a writer, and she was actually good. And it's just like, oh, okay, maybe this is maybe this is what good looks like. Okay.
Right.
But what is interesting is so that recalibrated. Maybe I'll just go for failure. Yeah. But interesting, as a result of a kind of midlife crisis a few years ago, I did actually get back. I did get into writing. I decided, oh, I write lots of things. I've written books. I've written articles. I used to be a columnist for a number of magazines and websites, and write things for user groups. And it's just like I wrote. I wrote plenty, and I just suddenly thought, well, maybe try something else. Let's go at something else. And I learned about this thing called flash fiction, which is very short fiction, only a few hundred words long, so very much in the short story range. And I started writing that. I attended workshops, and it was absolutely fascinating. And I have published in that space, and I've been, I've had stories included on websites, print magazines, even on radio, and included in anthologies and other collections. And so, in one sense, I've fulfilled that aspect. It's definitely not something you can be successful at, but there is a case that I would have taken that path, even though my education suggests I would end up doing something technological. If I hadn't been in software and doing what I do now, I would probably have ended up doing something else that was technical. But there's a bit of me that wants that failed writer to be true, because in one sense, I've kind of followed that with some kind of consistency.
I do remember that you I don't know, tweeted or you shared some of the flash fiction that you wrote on some of the things, and it's interesting because in well, you've written quite a number of books, I would say, that is on, well, depending on how you value success, that might be on multiple levels of success, I would say.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's but yeah, I think, well, there is I don't know how it feels to you, but for me it always feels like there's not much money value in writing the books.
Yeah.
And for many types of books, I would say, but for me there is more than success is more than just the money part. There is also
Oh
like, okay,
yeah, yeah.
using.
I think as a career, as a primary career, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. But as an adjunct or as a promotion, and that's the thing, is that I was told many years ago. It was actually by Martin Fowler, who has actually made money from books and been very successful. But he said this. He was referring to perhaps his least well-known book, but his first book, Analysis Patterns. And he was talking about the fact that he said the biggest difference is that it allows you to have a big business card. You can point to something. You can say, oh, there you go. It's not that it directly makes you money. It's not as in, pays for your rent, your mortgage, your living expenses, or anything like that. Is that what it does? Is it allows you to, as it were, put up a billboard and say, "This is me, and you can find me." And this is, and here's what I think. And in fact, the books I wrote years ago with Frank Bushman on pattern-oriented software architecture. Literally, those books were written because these were the answers to the questions that we keep getting. And instead of, well, rather than repeating it, why don't we put it in a book and then we can point to it? Once you've got a thing in the world, you can point to it. And that, so in that sense, I would say they are. Some of these books have been incredibly successful. Books I've edited as well. They have been successful in that sense because what they've done is they fulfilled that role. If you want to get rich with bestsellers, George R.R. Martin type thing, yeah, it turns out book sales in any domain, in any discipline, tend to follow a power law curve. There are a few people that become very, very successful, and everybody else is out here selling a few. And if you understand that you're probably part of that long tail, and then understand what is the role of that long tail, it's just like, well, here I am. This is me. And when people sort of say, oh, tell me something, you can point to it. It's in the world, and it makes it a little bit easier. So in that sense, I would say that there is, if you understand that that's a good criterion for success, then yeah, I would go with that.
When you say that, Martin Fowler said it's a big business card, did you ever use it as a kind of, I don't know, curriculum to send it to possible clients, books and things like that? Did you?
I have done it a couple of times, although funnily enough, not with the pattern-oriented software architecture books that I wrote, but actually with a couple of clients. One of the books I edited, 97 Things Every Programmer Should Know, we did actually use that as the basis for stuff and send that to them, and kind of an incentive model and so on. But also it acted also as a study book. It's kind of a good kind of lunchtime conversation. It's got lots of small pieces of things that you can, as a group, kind of discuss. And so I have used it in that sense as a physical thing, rather than just as an abstract, figurative idea. But yeah, it has worked in that sense.
Yeah, I did that, something similar with the tips of the agile trenches. I did the
Yeah,
same thing, like just sending it out when people ask for a little bit, like, okay, this is, and of course it's just like the 97 things. It's not just your ideas, but it's things that you like, or that you
yeah,
say, okay, this is the kind of thing that you can expect what I do,
yeah,
that
yeah,
is
yeah. I think
that
very
brings
much that's the
a
case.
lot there. Okay, let's go to, because we're talking in a way about success and things, but success also comes with challenges. What do you consider your biggest challenge, and why is that a good thing for you? And of course, the biggest challenge that you want to be token open on the internet, of course, because there
Yeah.
might be
So
things that
okay, I'm going to go with something that's fairly personal in that case. I was thinking about this one before, and I thought, well, actually, why not? Um, if I look back, and at the end of last year, I got a diagnosis for ADHD. Um, to a lot of people who know me, this is completely unsurprising. Um, but at the same time, there's one of these things that I generally I'm cautious about. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a mental health professional. This is not my domain. I've also discovered over the years that I'm actually really bad at recognizing myself in a description of symptoms. I have the opposite of cyberchondria, which is the hypochondria that you get by Googling. Some people disappear down a rabbit hole, go, oh, maybe I've got this, and I've only got months to live based on what I've just read on Google. I kind of go the opposite direction. I look for, I check and cross check, and initially it doesn't occur to me until having an official diagnosis was actually a huge sense of relief. But it is a big challenge because it affects the way that ADHD is something that affects the way that you organize time. It affects the way that you focus. It affects where your energies go. It affects all kinds of things. From the moment you wake up, if not before, to the moment you go to sleep. And to recognize that maybe not most people are not having this experience, it's kind of an interesting one. But for a lot of your life, if you don't recognize it as that, you start feeling broken, and you start thinking, what's wrong with me? How do I fix myself? Why is this the case? And you try 1,000 different tricks, and eventually somebody says, trust me, it's not these. This is part of your wiring. Just go with the flow. And for me, that's if you like, that's been a challenge for a number of years because I've not known that this was a thing, or I've not recognized it within myself, and so either denied it or tried to fix it. And that has been a problem. That's a huge challenge, and emotionally and all the rest of it. And so now the challenge is, and I was actually messaging somebody about this today, and what I've been doing really the last month or so is trying to find the way of working that acknowledges that doesn't try to be either completely disorganized or try to over-organize myself in a way that just does not fit with me and makes me miserable because I can't stick to it. and to try and find this kind of, what is the flow that works for it. That at the moment, I would say, is probably my greatest challenge. So it's very much a personal thing. It is not a technical thing at all, and it is very much a personal life thing. But yeah, I would say if I had to share this one either over a coffee or in the pub, this would be it. This would be it.
This is this is probably already a challenge for your whole life, but now that with the diagnose, what I'm hearing, it's helping you to kind of accept yourself in that way, to not, because what I
Yeah,
hear is a lot of people sometimes try to fix, yeah, but if you're disorganized or whatever, you need to do this, and
use
it's like,
this. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
that's the whole thing. Is the acknowledgement. It's not that certain techniques don't work. It's just that sometimes a lot of them don't stick, and sometimes when you do find a habit or a routine or something that works, it's not the thing that people would have expected. It's not easily fixable, and this is the kind of the sense that you get from it. I think one of the I came across this wonderful observation. It was more broadly about neurodivergence in general, but the value of the diagnosis is that it's nice to know that that you are a zebra and not a broken horse. And that's the whole point. It's just like, oh, I'm a normal zebra. That's me. That's just the way that this works. Instead of trying to fix the thing that is effectively unfixable or requires an immense, and that's the thing I've realized with a number of things around this, plus other mental health issues, the amount of energy going on to try and fit or fix and so on, it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And it's just like, once you can say, okay, I'm going to let that go, and I just need to find a different way of thinking and accepting and all the rest of it, there's a there's a lot less energy you have to expend. It's a lot less tiring. I'm just going to say that straight out. It's just like, okay, we're not, perfect is not on the table. It never was anyway for anybody, but it's just a case of like, I don't have to try and fix this. I just have to try and find what is the path that works. It's more like, it's like sailing. You don't get to choose the winds, but you've got some choices in there. You don't get to choose the sea, but the conditions are not yours, but you have some agency in this. But maybe it's not, the advice for driving on the motorway is not going to help you when you're in the boat. So, stop using that advice. Try and, explore, be inquisitive, and work around it. So that, for me, I think ultimately that is both a challenge, but I think that has also been good. I think that mentally a number of things have happened over the last few years that have reduced the weight that I feel. And I would say this level of self-awareness, that kind of feedback, for me, it might not work for somebody else in a similar situation, but for me, absolutely a good thing. In one of those ones that if you gave me, if one of the, yeah, in fact, I'm going to put this down as the
yeah, go ahead.
question. I'm going to put this because you're going to ask me. I will come back to that one later. I was just about to
Okay.
throw in the question, but I was like, no, I'm going to use that one later.
What I really like is when you talk about the tips for driving and tips for sailing is different. Like, and somehow we live in a world where we try to unify everybody, and we should all be extroverts, and we should all be at the office, and we should all be whatever. And yeah, that's just not true. We're not all the same people, and we all need to have different kind of things, just like that animals are different and different kind of
Yeah,
things. And yeah,
yeah,
it's about figuring out what kind of animal and what kind of good and bad things, because there's, like you say, there's good and bad things about these conditions, and it gives you also the creativity that you have. And if you would use all these tricks to make it very rigid, then you would lose all your creativity.
yeah.
It would drive you crazy in many different kind of ways. Um, what I do want to add about it is that I've learned this a couple of years ago. I was researching a lot of time management techniques and saying, okay, can I turn this into ways to teach people about multiple options? And one of the tricks I learned there, and I'm not sure who said it, but one of these people that invented, I don't know, getting things done and a couple of these others, one of these trainers said is like, I myself also fall off the wagon of doing these things, and it's by
Mm,
teaching them again that I get again used to using these. And I was
yeah,
like, oh, so it's actually it's normal that for a lot of people it's hard to keep that rhythm, because even for the inventors it's hard. But there is a reason why they
yeah.
invented that.
Yeah,
It's like
that that's a really good observation and something that I've found with myself. This is, I've said it to a few people in private conversations, but it's sometimes I say, sometimes I do some of the things I do and say some things I, partly because it reminds me, it allows me to clear my thoughts. It allows me to remind myself that this is a useful practice and so on. It's not just a private habit, it can be effective, but I want to see what other people do with it. And in other words, give it out to the world, maybe the world gives it back to you, but you're also working through it, you're working it out. And, I think the most important thing, I'm currently reading Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. And Oliver Burkeman wrote a book 4,000 Weeks, which came out a couple of years ago, and I found that hugely, very deep. Wonderful is the kind of like anti-time management book. You have a finite amount of life on this earth. It's around 4,000 weeks. What are you going to do with it? You can't do everything, and time management unfortunately becomes almost like a pyramid scheme where you get, the more you get done, then the more that you have to do, and it becomes this vicious, and you will never finish. And he's come up with this other book, so which that is I do recommend that book to a lot of people. But the recent one I got for Christmas, and it is 28 days. Read a chapter a day, and I've been doing that I started on the 1st of January, and Meditations for Mortals. And he makes a very similar kind of point about also falling off the wagon. Just basically, don't beat yourself up. The whole point is that as long as you manage, and he uses the term, if you've got a daily habit, or you've got a habit that you always want to do, don't give yourself the perfection that you will inevitably fail from. Redefine it. He says, if you've got something you're doing daily, then make it daily-ish. Maybe you do it 5 days out of a week, and that's fine. Two days a week is not daily-ish, but 5 days a week is daily-ish. In other words, it's kind of close. And it's just like, oh yeah, this is good. So there's a couple of things that I do daily-ish, and once you reframe it like that, it's just like, hey, this is good. But there's other things. It's just, don't beat yourself up. Don't give yourself an excuse to don't create something that's too rigid that you can't reach. I think very much in terms of teams. Oh, here's our sprint goal. It's just like, well, that's a long way up there. I mean, it's a perfect thing, but you're never going to reach it. Not this team. That's not reasonable. Well, what about something? What do you do? Okay. Well, what's not far from what you already do that is achievable?
that's
I mean,
yeah,
this is the
exactly.
perfect thing. This is what people want to hear. You're never going to climb that mountain. You're not a mountaineer. You're doing this. What does this look like?
I had this discussion with a friend of mine, actually a girl or a young woman that was part of Code Dojo, and she's now, or she competed already twice in the Olympics with weightlifting, and she gave the example of, if you learn to lift weight, you don't start with 400 kilos because it just doesn't work. You have
Yeah,
to start with very low amount of kilos, and then you do that, and then every time you make it a little bit higher, and then you can move up.
yeah,
You don't start with the goal you want to achieve. No, you start
yeah,
small,
yeah.
and that's the yeah.
And be
This is
careful with those
otherwise,
goals. Yeah, be
and be
careful with those
careful.
goals. Yeah, because they sound good. I mean, we're kind of often encouraged to think or frame things in those terms, and actually, that can be quite destructive.
And sportsmen always also have times off, and they have breaks because they know fully concentrated all the time isn't good for a
Yeah,
healthy body, and it's not good for a healthy mindset either. And that is for me a risk of agile, in the sense that if we every 2 weeks want to do it and we always want to get better, it's a really big risk for burnout. And the
yeah,
real good people get that, or get into that risk zone. I would say that's something I've seen with a lot of people.
yeah. I think that is a
And
danger, and I think sometimes people pick that up. Sometimes people who perhaps don't understand the kind of the deeper philosophy or the implications of what's trying to be said, what they come along and they see, here's a way of doing stuff faster, or they see some of the tools and techniques that are promoted, and it's just like, how do we increase velocity, suddenly becomes the goal, rather than, you know how do we make the team more comfortable with the software they're developing so that they're able to continue developing it? Now, who cares about the next delivery? That's not how software works. I also, I'm going to say, it's a meta point. I get deeply frustrated with people who keep emphasizing, but the next deadline's important. No, it isn't. It absolutely is not. No matter how important you think it is, in 10 years' time, you will look back and go, which one was that? The point is, the goal of the game is to keep playing the game. That's the thing. And so the question there is that instead of optimizing, instead of falling for these metrics, I've had an interesting story point discussion with somebody recently, because it's very fashionable at the moment to say, oh, story points are terrible. I don't think they're terrible. I just don't think they're necessarily great. A lot of people take a tool as being the one true thing. And it's just like when story points came along, and there were lots of different techniques, but the whole point of them was like, here's to get you thinking about, you're stuck on estimation. So take a step outside your usual frame. And the thing you have to recognize is that if your usual frame is story points, then that's the usual frame you need to step outside of. But the point is that story points are not the goal. Software is the goal. Software delivered to people who can use it is the goal. And if you are stuck with something, find the thing that is not that thing that helps you. And then also be prepared to let it go. And I think the real problem is that story points are no better or worse than any other estimation or sizing or no estimation technique anybody's ever come up with, because all of these eventually they have utility, normally because, hey, it's a fresh perspective. And that's what values. It's a Hawthorne effect. It's kind of like, oh, okay, it's something different. And suddenly that was what you needed. And then you get stuck. But that becomes the new normal. It's the new stuck. And I think that also feeds into this. So the question is, are story points a good idea or a bad idea? I don't know. Where are you? And depends where you are on the material. If you're currently estimating in a way that is very traditional project management way, then maybe story points will allow you to unlock that. If you guys are using story points and you've now got conversion, you've got arbitrage between different teams, and you've got conversion ratios, and you're trying to optimize, story points are terrible for you. They are massively destructive. Don't blame the tool. It's one of those things. So I kind of, I kind of went through the kind of like, yeah, story points are terrible. Story points are great. Then story points are terrible. And I suddenly realized, no, they're just the thing that they helped. If they can help you at some point, that's great. They've done their job. Just don't make them do another job. They've already done the bit that they were good at. Leave them behind. Let them go. Thank them for their service. Yep, you got us through that. Now we need something different. Thank you very much. That's the way you should look at it. This is the agile in agile. People often lose that. They are drawn to a fixed idea, whereas the whole point is no, none of it's fixed.
Yeah, that's there is that well, not the first line, but what typically people call the first line in the Agile Manifesto: the individuals and interactions over processes and tools, even the Agile process and tools. The interesting thing I always find is that there is, as far as I know, no community that has invented so many processes and tools than the Agile community. But it's for the exact reason, as you say, we try something, it doesn't work, we invent something else, and it will work for a certain moment, and then you need to adjust and use something else. It might be the old one again, or might be something else. It doesn't really matter. It's what is in the current place that you are. And you might iterate a few times and come back and say, okay, now maybe the story points or whatever work again, and then maybe again not. So
Yeah.
a lot of that.
Think of your own practices as being a deliverable. Yeah, and you are the consumer. You're the customer. It's just like, what do we want from this? As a developer, that the point is, what am I getting from these things? And the minute they're useful, that's great, but also be aware, they may not be useful forever. They are not fixed points in the universe. And so therefore be prepared to change that, deliver and refine something new. But look at the pool of possibilities. That's one of the nice things. If you look at the agile literature with a little more curiosity, if you look at all the ideas that people have been throwing out for decades, look at them and treat that as a buffet. You don't have to eat everything, but give everything a try. And then the one, I'm going back for that. That one worked for me. That one works for us in this situation. Brilliant.
Yeah, and don't eat all the time the same thing
And
and all the rest.
exactly. But yeah, do vary your diet.
That's the word I was looking for. But like in here again, Kevlin, it shows you're very passionate, you're very driven. Do you know where that drive is coming from? Is that something you always had, or is there something that triggered that?
I don't know. I think that's a really that's a very good question. I don't know. I mean, I've looked at this question. I don't know necessarily what drives me. There are many things that I value. I think some of the drive, obviously, some of it comes from the way I'm wired, but I enjoy getting into things. Whether as a child, as an adolescent, and when I'm into something, it's kind of like I get very enthusiastic about it, and I kind of want to share it, or I want to try and learn as much as I can about that aspect of it. So I think that probably somewhere in there is what might be said to drive me. But at the same time, there's also something else, which is this is all change and all the rest of it. I also value stability and comfort as well. And it's kind of like this, is that a driver? I don't know. That's it's an interesting question, but it's somewhere between these rather strange poles, the strange and opposite poles, might be considered the driver.
But I've noticed that, well, I think for everybody who just follows this conversation up to now, it's very, yeah, you get very passionate about these things, and I've noticed that also. Yeah, you not just, well, just look at the pictures that people send you. It's not
Hmm.
just about the funny part, but you immediately see the value, try to look at it from a deeper side. Yeah, these kind of things that, yeah, I feel a lot of passion, I feel a lot of, yeah, caring about the world around you, about, yeah, a lot of things, I would say.
Okay, yeah, actually, let's put it different. I guess that things that I can learn from, or things that I can learn from, or share, or connect. I find a lot of value in taking things that, taking one idea and another idea and going, oh, look, there's something here. So it's not necessarily original, but it is kind of like, oh, what can, these are funny, these screens, but wait a minute, what else? And you can really dig into it, and it's quite interesting. And then what's also interesting, you can create a dialogue around it. There's one screen that I used to share on one failure screen I used to share on one of my talks for years, and I misattributed the operating system. I used to describe it, and somebody said, actually, I don't think it's that. I think it's this, and they gave the exact error code. I was able to Google it, and then we kind of refined it, and they said, "Oh no, it's a Windows thing." I said, "No, actually, said it's worse than that. It's a DOS thing. This thing's actually DOS. We'd originally described it as Linux. It's actually DOS." And I said, "Yeah, because I recognize this is a bit of my experience. Is like I recognize some of these things now that you say that. This is how the DOS architecture worked." And so you end up, the fact you can pull a thread, you can get deeply into something, but what you're doing is you're bringing these disparate pieces of knowledge. Sometimes they are completely accidental, and sometimes they're deliberate. You research them, but sometimes people give you stuff, and you kind of go, "Oh, that's interesting. What does that combine with? What can I then say or learn from that?" So yeah, I guess that is probably the deeper driver for me, in terms of what you see.
Well, you keep sharing it with the world, because that's what I also see in what, when you learn these things, when you see these connections, that you keep sharing with people in your talks, and I guess with your clients and stuff like that as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, I think that's the thing, is that I'm not an information hoarder.
Mm.
I don't keep secrets in this way. I don't have no secret source about how to do stuff. But what I have found is normally, it's kind of almost that, well, if it worked for me, then maybe if I pass it on to somebody else, they will combine it with something else. And what I think of as a mild curiosity could be the thing that they needed at that moment that actually changes the way that they develop, or that they then come out with a different idea or create. I mean, I've had people create open source projects based on throwaway remarks or fragments of code that I've put on,
Oh,
because I've just
that's
found it interesting, and they've gone, wait a minute, there's something here,
there's an
and
idea.
they've seen something and they've run with it, and that's their passion. So if I keep it to myself, then there's no value. So yeah, I think my kids have always been frustrated by the fact that I keep saying, "Oh yeah, information should be free," and all the rest of it, and it's just like, yeah, is that a way to make a living, Dad? So, but yeah, I do believe that there is, I want to put this stuff out, because I think it's interesting for me if somebody else has the same response. that's great.
Get improved, and indeed, well, somehow you find a way how to make a living out of that, in a way.
Yeah, stumble through
Maybe
it.
in
Yes.
it
Yeah.
exactly, stumble through it. And talking about that, that actually brings me to that next question. What do you consider your biggest achievement on all these stumblings that you did? Is there
Oh,
something that you, well, and actually I want to, what I've noticed in these conversations is that there is a question. This is basically your moment to be proud and to be really, yeah, to be proud of something. Is that easy for you, Kevlin, to be proud?
no, it's not. That I think that's a very good observation on your part to ask that question. I don't think it is easy for me to be proud of stuff. There's always the kind of like, well, maybe something's better. Maybe somebody else could do something better. I mean, and so, but also I think that there's an interesting thing. If if we had this conversation 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, I'd probably more easily be able to identify something that I considered a big achievement. But but the way that I look at things now is I don't tend to look at things like that. Um, so in other words, I that's not how I've looked at the world. And I look at it even less so now. I used to kind of mark out, oh, that's an achievement. It's just like, yeah, maybe that's not, maybe that feels a little bit superficial from my perspective. And so I'm going to go with my biggest achievement so far, based on certain experiences that affected me nearly a decade ago, is being here. I think it's great to be here. I think some of that is some of that's luck, but also to be able to have this conversation with you and to be able to talk about this stuff. Let's go with that. So well done. This is a peak moment. But literally, it's in fact, there is a perfect example. There's a perfect analogy. A friend of ours, years ago, when he was living in Bristol, he'd sometimes come round. We'd have friends around. We'd eat, and my wife would create this veggie lasagna, and Elliot would always say, "Oh, this is the best lasagna. It's the best lasagna I've ever had." And then my wife called him out on it one day, and she said, "But you always say that. How can they always be the best?" And he said, "At this moment, it is." And it's just like we've used that term in this house, best lasagna, ever since. So this is the best lasagna. My greatest achievement so far. This is the best lasagna. It's just like that. I'm going to look at it like that. If you ask me this question again in a year, then that will also be true, but for a year's time.
That's, but that is also very being in the moment, and being, if you talk about meditation and everything, it's a lot about being in the moment and being up, yeah, at valuing the moment and the life that you're living in a way, I would say.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think it is very much so. And the funny thing is that now I'm saying it, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, except when I started saying it. I thought, oh, is he going to pick up? Yeah, yeah, it is. It is very much that, but perhaps via a different road, the lasagna road.
that's yeah, that is a nice way of thinking about the world and thinking about achievements and thinking about things. And actually, probably this is why also I added in that question also or when I showed it on screen, there was also the words "so far" on it, because I do
Mm,
think with everybody, you might be very proud of something, and in a year or two you might be thinking about something else, or thinking about something that
yeah.
even happened 10 years ago. But yeah, it's
Mm,
we keep changing our minds about these things, and that's
yeah.
perfectly fine.
Yeah, I
um
think that is, it's very much again is picking up on what we said before about goals. Be very careful about what your goals are and how they define you, because sometimes when we achieve them, there's genuinely there's a dip afterwards, but also to be understand them in relation to you. Years ago I did a 10-kilometer race for the first time, so a 10,000-meter run, and my kids were of an age just like, "Dad, are you going to win?" And it's just like, I do not have a runner's physique. I do not have a runner's background. I was in my 40s. It's just like, yeah, I'm not going to win. I said my goal, the first time I ran, I said my goal is to finish. The moment I finished, that was my greatest achievement. And then I could worry about personal best. but it was exactly that. And that, the so far thing is really, really important. It's a kind of a kind of readjustment, and a kind of like a reminder to yourself.
It reminds me about the story somebody else, and unfortunately I forgot who, but there was someone else on the podcast who talked about a coach who worked with a young girl, and she ran, and she didn't ran really good, but she finished a certain race. Who was lost, but she had it at a certain time, and he said, "This is your personal record. You've run, I don't know, the 100 meters
Yeah.
in this many seconds. This is your personal record. Now you know what you want to aim for next time if you want to become better." And that's really, if that's your goal, want to become better, then you don't have to worry about all the other people who are running like you when you were running that thing. Like, yeah, of course, if this is the first time, you're not going to win. Very exceptional first time runners might win, but that's not your goal. You just want to see,
Yeah.
can I finish? And that's already a real achievement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really like the fact that you say then you get the backlash. I learned, I forgot the word, but Jim McCarthy also talked about it. Every time you achieve something, you get a backlash. It's like when you shoot a gun, you also have there's a
Recoil.
word,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
recoil, and Jim calls it, like, every time you have an achievement, you have recoil, and you have to take that into account, that when you
Yeah.
achieve something, how big or small, you will have recoil, and you will
Yeah.
have to rethink. And the best way is then to not set new goals, but go on an adventure, do something that can
Mhm.
free your mind, free your body, whatever, and then you can be ready to set other goals
Yeah.
or to look at other things, because that recoil will happen,
Yeah.
especially if it's a large thing to
The
achieve.
the bigger the thing, the bigger the recoil, definitely. And what is interesting is that sometimes when those things have happened, we tend to look back at what was, we thought was a mountain. We look back and it's just a foothill. We look
It's
backwards and it's just like, oh, it wasn't as big as I thought it was. It was a step. And so, yeah, I'm kind of at the point where I recognize that there's kind of like a number of things that I try to understand. Oh, this thing feels like an obstacle, but actually, you know what? Maybe it isn't, or maybe it's just a hill, and it's a small one, it's a modest one, and that'll be fine. But don't get too attached to it, because either it won't feel as important, or the next thing after it will be more important. Just see what happens when you get there.
Thanks for sharing this, because I think it's really important to think at these kind of levels. Let's move to that next question. Do you have a personal agility tip to share? Is there anything that you, yeah?
Um, yeah, I'm just gonna. This is an interesting one, because obviously different people already have a kind of a mental framework and a set of practices that they may follow. But the one that this is something that I've not necessarily learnt. This is one of those examples of something I say to remind myself, yeah, but that I have learnt through teaching primarily and running workshops over the years. And I even gave a lightning talk at a local user group years ago where I included. So I'm going to break this one personal, agility tip into two, because I normally find I pair these whenever I'm doing stuff. It's whether it's coding or more broader paper-based exercises with teams. Is step one: ask for help. Honestly, we're not necessarily very good at it. Ask for help sometimes, and that is a very common thing, particularly in software development. People are always trying to say what makes a good developer, and people come at this question from lots of different directions, and sometimes people look at it from technical qualifications. You get some people say, oh, you need to have a strong maths background, and people come at this from various things, and other people say, oh, you've got to have a sense of curiosity and all the rest of it. And I'm not I'm not prepared to say I have the answer, but one of the things that I found fascinating a number of years ago was realizing, wait a minute, why is it that people often get stuck? One, many developers are they are problem solvers. Okay, this is a very, very common thing. Oh yeah, we solve problems. That's what we do. We're able to puzzle through things. Okay, it can be design, it can be bugs, it can be issues in production. All of these things are about, oh, I see a puzzle, I must solve it. Okay, so we have that. Okay, but that's not the only thing. There's another thing in there. We're also creative. Now, we make stuff. It's one of the most creative jobs on the planet. Literally, in software, you create something from nothing. You know, all other artistic professions tend to have to express themselves through physical media and are constrained by crazy things like the laws of physics. But we get to have almost, magical abilities as software team can produce. So we're naturally inspires something very creative. And actually, software developers often underestimate their creativity. They often say, "Oh, and sometimes they refer to the creatives in their organization, the people that do UI design and so on." And I always tell people, no, don't sell yourself short. Writing code, you are literally casting spells into the ether and stuff happens. That is the most creative thing that humans can do. And I said, right, okay, what happens if you take these two traits? And there are other traits, but let's take these two traits, problem solving and creativity. What happens if you put those two together in the same person? Well, one of the things you get is sometimes some really awesome stuff, but you also get people not asking for help because sometimes there's a personal protection thing, fine, but sometimes the fact that I can't do this is a problem for me to solve. And I create solutions. And these two in the same place mean you're not going to ask for help because you're thinking, oh, I can just create something. I can come up with something here. I can create it. So it turns out that these two are very productive and constructive, but they also have this kind of destructive interference, which is sometimes people are reluctant to ask for help. Sometimes it's for a personal image reason, but actually in many cases people don't recognize the thing I should be doing at this point is not trying to create solution. Maybe I've reached a point where actually just look out, go and ask for somebody. Maybe maybe I need to ask a manager. Maybe I need to ask the architect. Maybe I need to ask one of my colleagues who already used this tool or seen this code. The point is that you're trying to solve a problem, but you're also trying to create. I can create a solution to this, and that those two things. So literally the first thing is ask for help. Doesn't mean I'm good at it, but I have found that when people do this, and I can see this playing out in training courses. I find one of the most fascinating things I have learned through training is that you can have huge production code base with countless developers, and it's been developed for years and years, and it has got a gazillion lines of code. You have them for a couple of days and they recreate every problem that they already have in just a few minutes. It's absolutely fascinating to watch. I remember kind of understanding that one day, going, wait a minute, they've just recreated all of their inhibitions, their practices. I can see it in this small exercise. It's a microcosm, and they're not asking for help. Oh, okay. And I will always tell people you can ask for help. And it's just like, and I go around the room, or I can see it if I'm doing this online. I can see that they're struggling. I can see they're struggling, and nobody's asking for help because they think they can work their way out of it. And it's just like, maybe they can, but you've got to have, every loop needs a stopping condition. Every programmer knows this. Every loop needs a stopping. You've got to find your stopping condition and go, you know what? We tried. Let's go ask Kevlin. Either from the technical front or the customer front. So that would be tip number one. Ask for help. It turns out it's much harder than we think, but it's also more rewarding and helpful than we think. And the other one is work in small steps. And if you think you're working in small steps, see if there's something smaller. It's not small enough. This I find, particularly when I do things, when I run workshops where there are iterations, I always tell people, no, small. What are you going to do first? We're going to do this. Smaller, smaller, smaller. Or I'll do TDD courses, smaller steps. It turns out almost everything comes down to try something smaller. Somebody, oh, we're already working in small steps. No, I haven't. You haven't seen them, Kevlin. No, smaller. I can tell you that's almost going to be a universal response. And again, something I can learn from as well.
Yeah, I really love that the small steps. That this is how we learn to walk. Basically, we don't tell our children that, but that's basically what they do, and they figure it out on their own. Like, yeah, if you fall over, make smaller steps, and then there is less chance of falling. And I think when people have yeah, what is it? At DevOps days, I fell off a stairs and I had a problem with my foot and I had to walk with crutches and stuff like that. So again, I needed to make smaller steps to make sure I could walk for a while, and we come back to that all the time. And
Yeah.
yeah, and the asking for help. The interesting thing, so one of the places where people can learn for ask for help is in the book The Fearless Change that
Yeah.
Linda Rising and Marilyn Mans wrote about. Marilyn Mans. And interesting, what I discovered this year is that Mary was actually really bad at asking for help herself, and that's yeah. She wrote about
Mm.
it, but similar to what you just said, it's like okay, I needed to remind her, or she needed to remind herself, like, hey, this is actually one of these patterns that's really
Yeah.
helpful and really good to keep, yeah, asking,
Yeah.
and it's so hard. And I would add to that, especially into engineering, where we are, is that well, typically this is things that are learned in school, and schools are really bad at teaching people to ask for help because in school it's called cheating, and so yeah,
Yeah.
that's it
Yeah.
it kind of makes us not asking for help,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
it's
this.
interesting you mentioned Mary Lynn because I think Mary Lynn and Linda is around the first time I met them was actually at a conference where they were workshopping, trying to get suggestions, and one of my suggestions is actually in the book, location, location, location. But it was one of the first times that I met them. I don't know if it was the first time, but it was at a conference in the UK, the OT conference, which has since become the SPA conference, and it was based in Oxford at that point. But the thing one of the things I learned from that conference series was a piece of advice from John Daniels, which relates to this, which is um, he would run workshops. It's a very open-ended, not a formal training type conference. It was he said, "Oh yeah, I propose workshops based on things I don't know." Because he says, I want to know the answer. So I run a workshop because then I can learn from it. And, so literally that's the best way of asking questions. Is uh, just genuinely just goes out and it's just like, I don't know. And I'm running the session. I have no idea. I want you to tell me and collaborate. And I always thought that was a really interesting way of approaching it.
I think, yeah, for me is when I read a book that I really want to learn better, it's one of the ways trying to create a workshop around the book because by teaching it, I learn it much better. And indeed, you get so much questions from other people that you learn it at a much deeper level. So yeah, it's a way of asking for help or working it. Okay, I want to move to that next question. What have you learned about remote work in the last year?
Oh, there are so many things that I've learned about remote working. Uh, let's just boil it down to a couple. One of them is particularly so in one sense, I have worked remotely for a very long time. A company I started working for. Oh, this is going to make me feel so old. I've never realized it's nearly 30 years ago. Okay, in my head, the 1990s are still pretty recent. But when I look at a calendar, it's quite clear that they're not. But one of the things we did was it was work remotely. Sometimes we'd be in the office, sometimes we'd be at a customer site, sometimes we were, but also working from home. And that was dial up, connections and using Lotus Notes and stuff like that. And so in one sense, I have worked remotely and working for myself. I often do have to do things or prepare or whatever when I'm at home. But the remote working in terms of now I'm properly interacting with you, obviously changed in the last 5 years. So there was a shift. So in one sense, I was ready for it. In another, I wasn't. But the on-screen, more continuous interaction, things I've learned is continuous interaction via a screen is exhausting. And I think everybody learns that. And so therefore, whatever you plan, you need to factor in breaks. If you are dealing with lots of different people, whether you're doing a code review or you're running a course, you have to be more respectful of time, because which for me is quite difficult, but I am much more my punctuality is much better when I'm online as a result of this, because I recognize that because you can't see what other people are doing and what constraints they've got, whether it's childcare, whether it's whatever it is, um, it's far harder than if you're all in the same office. You can, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes extra of whatever you're doing tends not to have the same repercussions because you're all physically there anyway. And you have that notion that you're playing off, you improvise, you can read the room much more easily. So time and breaks turn out to be far more important than they necessarily would be when you are in the office. And I guess the other one that I've learned, particularly when doing sessions that are supposed to be interactive, and obviously as a course instructor and as somebody who's a workshop leader, this really becomes noticeable, is the tendency for people to not have their cameras on. And I've noticed this. Some companies, it's almost a company culture thing. Some companies, you kind of like, oh, all the cameras are on. Other companies, consistently. There's one company, I'm not going to name them, but they are an international company. And it's like this has spread around the planet. They all do it. They are all cameras off people. And it's so funny because, oh, it's a national character thing. Not at all. It is actually consistent within this company. But one of the things that I learned is that if you are attending an event or you are running an event and you are doing it online, and particularly from things like meetings and so on, as well as obviously things like training, but if you're doing this, the cameras on thing's really important. Now, obviously, there are practical reasons why sometimes that's not going to work for people. Fine, we respect those. We're not talking about those ones. We're talking about the fact that a lot of people choose not to, and they are entitled to do that. But what is interesting, I've learned, is to do with memory. It's plain and simple. It's to do with memory. You will remember better. Other people will remember better, because it turns out as human beings, we are situated in an environment. We take account of the people that are there in the physical spaces, and therefore we situate ourselves in those. One of the things I found kind of 2020, 2021, I remember trying to remember, I thought, oh, I've done this talk. Or I was on a panel. Yeah, in fact, there was one I was trying to remember. I was on a panel with some people. I could not remember what conference, online conference it was, because they'd all blurred together, because they're all in my room. Normally, when you do a physical thing, if you visit a client, you remember where it is. You remember the walk from the station or from the hotel. You remember what the office felt like. All of these things, it turns out, are vital for our memory. Our memory is not a shopping list of facts. It's just like, it really is everything situated in reference to other things. So you need to give yourself lots of clues. It doesn't mean that we can't do stuff remotely. We do it very effectively. It's just that if you give people faces, they will remember more about what's going on than if you don't, because otherwise it's just a vocal stream. And it's just like all the other vocal streams they've experienced. They don't differentiate it. The knowledge does not have impact. It does not have, if you like, as many indices to cross-reference it. So that is one of the things I've learned. This is actually, the cameras on thing is not just a nice social thing. It's actually a deeper, it's something more fundamental about memory and recall and learning.
Reminds me also about a tip that I think I've learned from Jimmy Janlin, is that he said, like, if because like you said, if you're online, it looks like the same thing as yesterday. It's the same meetings. If
Yeah.
I'm with the whole day with in meetings online with different kind of people, I don't see the difference anymore. And he said, like,
Yeah.
it's actually good if you can, because the meetings you remember in the company, because you know, I was in that meeting room, there was this environment and that kind of thing. So he gave us tip, like, you could also how was it, change the background, so everybody could use, let's say, okay, now we'll all have a sea as a
Oh, that's an
background, and then
interesting. That's an
somehow
interesting thing.
that
Yeah.
is the retrospective about the sea, whatever that is, and then you remember again that meeting much better because it's linked to that. We all have something about a sea
Mm.
background or a wood or whatever, but make it something that is visually, again, we remember
Mm.
it while we're
Yeah.
doing it. And I really like that idea, and it
Yeah.
really resonates with what you say about seeing things, and because that's part
Yeah.
of our memory.
We are physical creatures, and so therefore any physical clue,
Will
hint at the
help us.
physicality will help us. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's move to that next question. What is a book that you have read that you want to talk about?
So I was kind of, I almost went for a software book, but actually I finished just before Christmas. I finished the Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin, a record producer. He's been producing records since 1980s across many different musical genre, and I have a few books that there's books that I read yeah, I have a number of different books on the go, and I normally have a book that I read just a chapter from every day, and small chapter. So Oliver Burkeman, Meditations for Mortals, is the current one. This one was the previous one. So it took me a while to read it because my goal was not to finish the book. My goal was to read one chapter a day, and there are 73, 74, 75 chapters. That feels about right. And it is about creativity. And he manages to broaden it out to other forms of art, but it's very much about an artist's kind of journey in that sense. Whatever form of art you are taking, obviously, many of his examples are drawn from the world, the music business, but he is able to generalize and sort of give some breadth to these ideas in the world of writing, visual arts, and so on. And actually, this picks up on a point that I was making before: software development, whatever your role in it. Whatever your role in it, it doesn't matter if you're a product owner or you're cutting code, you are involved in one of the most creative endeavors that humans do. But we underestimate what it is. It's every now and then take a step back and think about what it is that we're doing. It is in many ways the most creative profession, one of the most creative areas that exist. And we are, as I said, we're creating something from nothing, and it is a boundless possibility. But that's also a potential disadvantage. So reading this book, I was kind of like towards the end of it, I was like, oh, actually, no, I want to talk about this is a book I want to recommend to people. It might not be for everybody. It's got a kind of like a slightly Zen-like quality to it in places. As I say, the chapters are fairly short. But I remember, I took a bunch of quotes from this book because there's a lot of really interesting examples. His approach is very, very gentle, very sympathetic, very understanding. He's not giving you a how-to guide. He's not saying these are the secrets to creativity. And he's very gentle and understanding. He's got a very sympathetic approach. He's very, he's the person in the room. He's not the person directing the room. He's the person that is kind of observing and go, oh, well, maybe this needs this. And actually, one of the there's a wonderful bit because I kind of took a number of quotes from it. And by the way, just physically, this is a lovely book. Just physically, it's got its own little mark here. It's not So sure, you can read it on Kindle, but if you're reading it on Kindle, get yourself a physical copy. There's a joy to actually just leafing through this and digesting each chapter slowly in turn. When he reaches talking about collaboration, there's this wonderful one. He says, sometimes the most valuable touch a collaborator can have is no touch at all. That notion of maybe the thing I should do here is nothing. It's just like the whole point is that he talks about all the everythings you can do, and then he reaches this point. You know what? Maybe nothing is the right thing at this point. Where again, for those of us who are driven to fix, I should be doing something at this point. There is a solution. It may be actually the opposite. But he also talks about, and again, there's, given we were kind of talking about techniques and their strengths and boundaries, there's another observation he makes. Any framework, method, or label you impose on yourself is just as likely to be a limitation as an opening. In other words, that idea that every single thing that we get, it's just like, yes, that may absolutely be the thing that you wanted that opens something up, but but you do it for too long and it becomes the exact opposite. It becomes its own nemesis. And I'm sure a number of us experience this. You do something in a particular way with one team on one project, and then you move to another and you try the same thing and it doesn't work. What? The dependency and the subtlety of the context matters, and that recognition that it's not about the fixed rules. It's just like, okay, understand that this had its time, this worked here, but that doesn't mean it's worth it trying, but it's not a necessary conclusion that it will work. And to understand these things, and he also talks about the benefit of limitations as well, but this idea is really quite important. And that idea, we're in the context of a podcast on Who is Agile and talking about agility. There's a lovely one here that sort of echoes, but perhaps a little, the original manifesto. The synergy of a group is as important, if not more important, than the talent of the individuals. And you talked about individuals' interactions earlier on. It's that whole point is just like, yeah, ultimately it's not a solo sport. Okay, that most software is developed by groups of people, and if those groups of people can behave like teams rather than just groups of people, then that's going to be far more effective. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot in this book. And just, if you yourself consider, yourself to be, if somebody, you consider yourself to be interested in any form of art, this is going to be good. But if you recognize that actually in software and its development, around its development, that's true. You might get something in this book. Maybe it doesn't land with you, but maybe you go, oh yeah, I can. There are lessons here about thinking, but also things that I can turn into practicality, into practical advice. So yeah, I definitely recommend this one.
I need to look out a little bit with the time, but I still want to do something that I haven't done before. Is that I want to show a book that I had a couple of them, but I want to just show one that I think I've learned from you, and so that you talked about. I don't know, online or offline, or to me, I don't remember anymore. But this one is something I think I've learned. This is a book
Oh
that I've learned
yeah.
from you as well. Could you just say in a couple of sentences why this is such an interesting book?
Um, because the writers of The Simpsons are complete nerds. Yeah, and they delight. So Simon Singh is somebody I've met at a number of different occasions, and I had the delight and privilege of being able to interview him a couple of years ago. So that's online if you want to kind of go. If anybody wants to find out more about this stuff.
I'll add the
And
link to the show notes. Yes.
yeah, and so. Um, and so the whole thing is that buried within The Simpsons are all these little Easter eggs, and some of them are cultural, but some of them are also mathematical. And Simon Singh probably first came to light. I remember, there was a TV in the UK. It was a science series, Horizon, and it's one of the few Horizon where I genuinely just thought this is one of the best science documentaries I've seen. And I remembered who had written it. I don't normally do that because it's just like, yep, the credits roll. And I remembered his name, and he wrote a book on it years later, and it was about the solving of Fermat's last theorem and the whole history of it. I actually rewatched it. You can find it on YouTube. I rewatched it a couple of years back, and he's done a number of things within physics and maths. But this book is really interesting because he started noticing watching The Simpsons. It's like, wait a minute, there's a whole that's kind of a there's also references to Fermat's last theorem. There are lots of little scientific gems and references as well as cultural references, but also mathematical bits and pieces. So it's a delight in that sense. Yeah, it's just good fun. Just sort of scratching the
Yeah.
surface. So yeah, I definitely recommend that one.
Yeah, when I don't know, I think you talked about it at the conference, and then I bought the book. It's just wonderful, and I haven't read it cover to cover, but yeah, just a little bit like
It's
what you
one you
say
can dip
from
into. Yeah.
yeah, you can dip in from time to time. Let's move to that question that you already prepared while we were in the beginning. What is a question you think I should also ask you, and what is the answer?
If you had a time machine, where would you go back to?
Wow.
Yeah.
And I
Now,
do remember there is a picture of you with the time
the
machine,
TARDIS. Yeah,
the
the
TARDIS.
TARDIS. So yeah, from Doctor Who. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So now you say, yeah. What what question do you think I should? And what is the answer? I don't know what the answer is. And often, but actually, the reason it kind of came to me and erased my previous my previous answer to this is I almost said earlier on. It was funny enough that the question about challenge, what's my greatest challenge, and all the rest of it. And I said, oh yeah, ADHD, receiving the diagnosis, and then kind of like trying to reframe everything and re-understand and take that one forward. And I almost said, but I'll say it now. If I had a time machine, it's the one thing I go back and tell myself
When you were younger.
when I was younger. It's just like, you know what? Here's how it is, and here's how you are, and it's not a fight. It's okay. You don't have to fix it. You just gotta, In fact, I'll borrow from the subtitle here. Subtitle here is a way of being. You just got to figure out the way of being, rather than bouncing around like a pinball. And that is just, that is the thing I would do. I wouldn't go and visit the dinosaurs as my first port of call. I'd go and visit myself. Um, and I would offer myself this advice. You know, that it'd be as simple as that. I mean, obviously that leads to all kinds of interesting questions like the Novikov self-consistency conjecture, which I will leave people to go and Google, and the question of temporal paradoxes and parallel universes. If you want to tackle me over a drink on that one, I'm very happy to talk about this. But that's where I would
Yeah.
go first.
That's a rabbit hole we can dive very deep into,
Oh yeah,
and
very very deep.
and
Yeah.
and then we don't have the time for that. So I want to move to that next question. Who do you think I should ask next? And I think you had a couple of names of people that
I had a
you.
few suggestions. So because I didn't know what we wanted, so I sort of said, yeah. So Diana Montalian, she
And
recently
this is
published.
her, if I'm
Ta-da!
correct.
Exactly. Yeah, although the hair color is probably different. Diana changes her hair color with reasonable irregularity. Uh, Learning Systems Thinking was published last year,
Yes, too.
and that's worth checking out. Um, and sometimes you can find her stuff online as well, and often at various conferences. Sometimes the DDD space is where you'll find her, but running workshops and so on. So Diana was one. Daniel Terhorst North. So historically, brands himself as a agile troublemaker, but for many people, there we go.
This is Dan or
Yeah,
Testapop for some people.
yeah. So BDD being a very obvious thing, but Dan has an interesting way of looking at and approaching subjects in general. I think that's cool. Rebecca Parsons is somebody else I would also
That's
pick up.
Rebecca, if I'm correct.
Yep,
Well,
correct.
pretty
Yep,
sure.
yep. Sort of, she's been at ThoughtWorks forever, and she's got a good outlook on things, and her and a practical approach to technology and technologies as they've come and gone. Also had a couple of other recommendations, which we kind of discussed before the show. Dave Farley, who I've just
Dave
discovered.
is on the show on 155 for the people who are looking into that. I'll put the links in the show notes as well. Really
Yeah.
wonderful conversation. Yeah, very similar
Yeah,
to
and so
work.
there's an interesting thing here. So, there's a classic example of a race condition is I responded to this before that came out. So that we have that. And
Exactly.
then the one that I am going to mention it because we've been talking about failure. Trisha G, who co-edited 97 Things Every Java Programmer Should Know with
And
me.
who I did have a wonderful interview with, and unfortunately there was a problem with the download of that interview that I only discovered when I could no longer download it. And because of time limitations, we're not going to re-record it, which it's really a shame because it was a really wonderful conversation, and I really look up to that. I had so much good ideas, or I really looked forward to that conversation, and it was a really good one. But I failed in that way. I've learned again a lot of
But
stuff
the
about
technology
that.
failed. I mean, that's the thing. We started, when introducing me at the beginning, we talked about
Exactly.
technology
So
failing, and it's just like, there we go. That's it. So somehow that is relevant to this.
yeah, exactly. That fills as well. It's but yeah, it's these things happen. That's after 160, there's two, and they actually happened both in the same week, and I only discovered it later. And that I had that. Since then, I've learned. So one of the things I will do after this conversation, I will immediately download it, and I will immediately check if things are good, because then I still have time to recover if things are a problem. But unfortunately, with this tool and this technique, I think I have about a month to download everything and to get that. So that's and typically I don't look at that until I put things online, but I've stopped doing that. I now do it on the same day that I do the recording, which is much smarter. But I didn't think about that in the beginning. So yeah.
So, this is an example of learning from. We don't always learn from failure, but there is an opportunity there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but I really want to thank you for your time, because it's been a wonderful conversation. As I was expecting, we going in all kind of directions, which is how I like them most. It really felt like I said in the pre-talk, we're just sitting in a bar and discovering and talking about all kind of subjects, going in all kind of directions, and learning about each other. Yeah, on things that are going in
Very
life,
much
and
so.
that's what
Yeah.
I like. So, if people want to reach out to you, what's a good way to reach out to you?
Um, Online, I'm very easy to find. So, Kevlin Henney, if you Google that, you will get me on a number of different things. I am available on most social media platforms. I'm more active, probably. So, stuff like X and Threads, I check in on, but I don't really do anything with them except announcements and retweets. I probably am more engaged on Mastodon, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. And if you want to send me a proper message,
Or
then these
the LinkedIn.
there we go.
And indeed,
Yeah,
you have that's something we didn't discuss until now, but I do remember having a conversation that you were really happy with the gift of your parents giving you a very unique name that is
absolutely.
unique when you Google it. There's
Yep.
only one of you,
Yep, there's only
that
one
is a
Kevlin
really
Henney.
good
There's a
thing.
few Kevlins, but there's not many, and so sometimes I manage to get Kevlin name. You can find, you can find. I do a bit of photography now and then, and you can find my stuff on Instagram, but that is just things I'm photographing. It's not pictures of my breakfast or my family. It's nothing to do with software development. It's just photographs of around where I live or where I travel. So just I'm clarifying that because it's been quite weird sometimes when, as it were, the streams have crossed and somebody has messaged me something technical on Instagram. Hey, I wanted to ask you this question about. It's just like, oh no, that's a LinkedIn question. You know, it's yeah. Message me on LinkedIn. You can probably find my email address as well online. It's fairly easy to find. I mean, spammers find it all the time, so I'm sure that human beings
That other
can.
people can find as well.
Yeah.
Well, again, wonderful time with you. I'm going to leave you and go for your extra things that you wanted to do tonight, and I'm going to have
Which will
dinner with
actually
my family.
involve talking to a couple of geeks in a bar. So yeah, yeah.
Well, I don't know if I know them, but anyway, have a wonderful time tonight. And yeah, for me, I have my geek talk already of the evening, so I'm really happy with this. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.